You know, I suppose in most families, when you think back the time that the children were growing up, there are some little incidences that happened that probably stuck in everybody's mind. It wasn't necessarily something that was so cataclysmic, but just something that really struck a chord in everybody's life. And we all have things, if we think back, that somebody did or somebody said or something that happened at a particular time that made an impact on everybody in the family. One of those little incidences in the family when I grew up was, and I assume that the state probably still gives children vision tests every year at school. Do they still do that? Do they still? Yeah. Anybody know? Okay. I know some of you have children in school here. At least for a few years. But anyway, back in the olden days, they did that. And when my sister was preparing to go in the first grade, she had an eye test, and it turned out that she needed glasses. And we didn't know how much she needed glasses. I grew up on the farm about 18 miles from the Mississippi River, and I really can't tell you why, because I would have been 4 years old, but my family took her to Natchez, Mississippi to have an eye exam and to get glasses. And so they went for the exam, and then a few days later went back and got the glasses. And everybody in my family can recall the trip back home when she got her glasses, because we came across the Mississippi River Bridge there at Natchez, and she looked down and she said, "Mama, there's water down there." And pretty much everybody except the 4-year-old in the car started crying. And she said, "There's boats on that water down there." And you think about what that means. She didn't know that she couldn't see. It was just the way it was, the way life was. I remember my first preaching job in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. There was a young family there that had a young boy. I can't remember how old he was, but he was just a little guy, and he got glasses. And I was talking to him about it, and he told me, he said, "I bet I see better than most folks do." And I still laugh about him saying that. He was so proud of being able to see. Maybe you've heard the passage or read the passage in Proverbs 29:18, where there is no vision, what? The people perish, right? Where there is no vision, the people perish. By the way, how many of you finished reading your Bibles this year? All right, that's pretty high percentages. How many of you are signed up to read it next year? All right, if you haven't, the sign-up sheet is in the back, all right? And I wonder how it must make God feel as He sees His people, us, going about our lives day by day, month after month, year after year, accomplishing so little with our lives and getting involved in things of this world and becoming enthralled and so concerned about things in our environment that we lose a vision for what the Lord put us here for. It's really easy to do, isn't it? And maybe particularly during the last few months. And I wonder if we can look back on this last year or the last few years maybe in our life, and if we can point to something that we accomplished in our life that couldn't be done without Jesus, without God. Have you ever heard this passage? Now unto him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we can ask or think. Have you ever sat down and just really thought about that passage? It's really pretty remarkable the way that he puts these words together. A translation can say, now unto him that is able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or think. But he put another word. I mean, immeasurably is pretty open. It's pretty definite. I mean, how do you get any more than immeasurably? But he put another word in front of it. And if you said it in the English, it would be huper, which means way above. And so if you stop and you think that Paul is saying unto him who is able to do far above, immeasurably far above. I mean, why did he put all of those words in there? And surely we need to be impressed with that. Above all that we can ask, I can ask for some pretty big things. I think that I can think of some pretty big things. But you can't think of anything so big that God can't do far, far, far beyond anything that you can possibly imagine in your mind. Anything that you can get your mind around, God can do much, much, much more than that. Now, is that just rhetoric? Or should that mean something to us in our life? Should that motivate us? How many of us are maybe more like what Peter said, that we're blind and cannot see afar off? And every time I read that, I think of my sister and I think of myself. I started wearing glasses in the 3rd grade and have been wearing them every day of my life since then. Blind and cannot see afar off. To the church at Laodicea, John said, you're blind and you don't even know it. And that again reminds me of my sister. She was legally blind. It was correctable, but she was legally blind. And to think that somebody could be blind and not know it is kind of staggering to the mind, isn't it? But it's possible. It's possible in the physical world, and it's certainly possible in the spiritual world. And you think of how tragic that is if somebody went through their entire life and they were blind and they didn't know it. They couldn't see anything beyond just about right here. That's all we can see. I wonder how many of us spiritually can see anything beyond about right here. Can we lift our eyes up to the harvest and see that they're white? Or are we so focused on what's right here in front of us that we can't see what's out there? We can't see what God wants us to see. And so my question for myself, and I'm talking to myself as much as I am to you, I'm reminding myself of how short-sighted I can become. Do you have a vision of what you want the church here to be? I mean, have you given that any thought of what you want this church to be? You remember the incident when the Lord, as an angel, came to Abraham's tent and he said to him, you and your wife, Sarah, are going to have a son. And the next thing he said to Abraham was, is anything too hard for the Lord? And the reason that he said that to Abraham was because he heard Sarah giggle in the tent at the very idea that she heard this man tell her husband, I mean, here she is, 90 years old, and she heard this man tell her husband that they were going to have a child. And when she heard that, you know that she turned her head in the tent and she just started giggling at the very thought that that could be possible, because it's not possible. It was beyond anything she could ask or imagine, right? And so the Lord said to Abraham, he said, is anything too hard for the Lord? And what's the answer for that? I mean, that's an answer that we really need to give, and we really need to think about it and answer that with an honest answer for ourselves, because maybe we think that there are some things that are too hard for the Lord. And we think, and of course Sarah denied it, and the Lord said, yes, you did laugh. And so, if nothing is too hard for the Lord and He's able to do more than we can ask or think, then where's the problem? The problem has to be with us, doesn't it? And our lack of faith, our lack of vision. And when I think of how short and uncertain life is, and how much there is to be accomplished, I become concerned. And what really scares me is that every time that I say or I think, well, let's wait until everybody is ready to make sure that everybody's together before we do this. And I'm asking myself, am I saying that because of a lack of faith? You have things in the Old Testament given for our example, like it doesn't matter to the Lord to say by the many or by the few. Is there yet one man? Those statements really stand out in the Old Testament. And maybe I may be demonstrating in my life a lack of faith. You know, I learned pretty quickly when Janice and I got married, I had a lot of foolishness in me, and I still have some, but she's helped some of that out. But one of the things I used to like to do was to hold her down so that she couldn't move. And I found out that there is one thing that she cannot tolerate. She cannot tolerate being held down so that she cannot move. And so I thought it was funny for a little while, and then I realized it wasn't funny. She becomes a different person, let's just say it that way, all right, when I try to hold her down. So I quit doing that a long time ago. I quit doing it, and might not be able to these days, I don't know, but she gets a bit claustrophobic, and I'm thinking maybe we need a little bit of spiritual claustrophobia where we can't be held down. And we won't be held back, and we won't be held down. And so my plea for us tonight is, let's not sit back and lose sight of our vision, because if you don't act on it, you lose sight of it, and it becomes unimportant. And so I want to just give you what I think are some really ultra simple things that we need to be doing to make sure that if we've lost our vision, that we regain our vision. And that vision, I'm not saying it's just single. It may be how you feel about what's going on right now, that you need to get over it. You need to raise your eyes up above right here, above this year or the next 4 years or the next whatever it is that you're afraid is going to happen. And so I'm going to suggest the first thing that we need to do is realize that we serve a great big God. A great big God. And I think it may be really easy to lose our sense of awe. I mean, the Bible starts out in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's bigger than we can get our minds around. I mean, we don't even know where or if there's an end to the heavens out there, do we? I mean, this Hubble telescope that we've got will go out there a long ways, but there's still more stuff out there, isn't it? And He spoke a word. He spoke this creation into existence. How can you understand that kind of power? And the more that we learn about what we call nature, the more in awe we should be of God, of every minute detail of nature. He spoke this universe into being. He parted the waters. He fed and cared for every person that has ever lived on the earth. He has fulfilled every promise. He has brought powerful kings and kingdoms to their knees in short order. And he has raised kingdoms up from almost nothing. And through his Son, he demonstrated his power over nature, his power over diseases and demons, and even man's most dread enemy, his power over death. And so I think the first thing that we need to do is spend some time contemplating about God. On the way here, I looked and saw we got a full moon tonight. I'm always impressed with the full moon on a clear night, aren't you? It's just something I just like to sit out and look at. It's just such a gorgeous thing. And, you know, I don't understand a lot about the heavens and the stars and the planets and so forth, but just how the light shines on that so that it becomes a full moon every month, and then it becomes a new moon, and it basically disappears, and then it comes back and it waxes and it wanes every month. And it's everything in nature is so incredible. And so we need to back off and look at him. And whenever our science teacher teaches us that this has all happened by accident, we need to question that. There is no accident here. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 27, by faith Moses left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered, listen to the next phrase, because he saw him who is invisible. Because he saw him who is invisible. That's what motivated Moses his entire life. We can't serve that kind of God and be mediocre. Not really. And then not only do we need to realize how big our God is, we need to realize that God has given us an incredibly big job to do. And we know what that job is, don't we? In fact, it's the only thing in the world that's big enough for you to devote your whole life to. You don't have to devote your whole life to your job. You don't have to devote your whole life to anything in this world. But if you're going to please God, you have to devote your entire life to it. Your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. Everything. All in. Nothing held back. And so, in fact, the only thing in this world that we cannot accomplish without God's help is the job that he gave us to do. And we know what that job is. We've said in the past, and I haven't heard it in a long time, but it used to be very commonly said that there are three purposes of the church: evangelism, edification, and benevolence. And the result of that was that we picked two of those. And we became benevolent edifiers. And we left one of them out. We left the most important one out. In fact, benevolence and edification are for the purpose of the third one, evangelism, taking the gospel to the world. We help people. We encourage people. We meet people for the purpose of bringing them to the Lord. And whenever we use those things that he designed to be means to draw people to the gospel, and when that's as far as we go and that's as far as we see, then we're not realizing what our job is. And we're stopping short of what he wants us to do and to be. And Mark 16, go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. Matthew 28, and teach all nations. That's our job. And this area is our first step. And so I'm asking myself and I'm asking you, are we blind and cannot see afar off? And then the third thing, not only realizing how big our God is and how big a task he has called us to, then we need to realize that that great big God will give us all the help that we need to do what he's asked us to do. Isn't it amazing that God would trust us with such a task? I mean, you don't ask someone to do a job that you don't believe that they can do. And so God believed in us. And He told us that He would never leave us. And I'm thinking, is it just too big? And I think the answer maybe is, yes, it is for most of us. It's too big. We can't see that far. And so we've quit even talking about it. In verses and passages like, I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. Is that rhetoric? Is that just something that sounds good and makes us feel good whenever we quote it? And lo, I'll be with you always. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. Is anything too hard for the Lord? And we could just go on and on throughout the Bible, phrase after phrase, where God is motivating us and telling us, I'll never ask you to do something that I don't give you the ability to accomplish. The most important thing in all the world is not building churches. In fact, that's not even our job. That's God's job. But it's seeking one soul. That's our job. Looking for that next person who's searching for Jesus. Maybe they don't even know they are. And all the dollars and the miles and the tears and the study and the time and the love that's necessary to reach one soul. If we could devote our whole selves to that, if we're truly committed to seeking and saving the lost, then I would suggest to you that we don't have nearly as much problem with keeping the church focused and pure. Because we realize that if we act like the world, and the world can't see any difference in our lives, what's going to attract them to the gospel? What's going to cause them to come to us? You know, we've really been blessed, and I know that Stephen and Rose are live streaming right now. Annie is sick, by the way. That's why they weren't able to be here. And this is a young couple that recently was married and baptized the same weekend. And I think of how they came to make connection with the church. It was through the live streaming. And it had something to do with all of this mess that we're in, and they couldn't go to church and so anywhere, and so somehow they made a contact live streaming. And they watched it a few times, and they said, you know what, we want to go see this. We want to be there with these folks. And that's what led to the Bible study and people who were interested enough to have a Bible study with them. And they're a really, really sweet couple, and we love to have them as a part of our family now. And so we get to feeling sorry for ourselves and all the things that's happened in this year. And really, there are some good things that very likely wouldn't have happened had not this virus, given the difficulties that we see. And so we want to do whatever is necessary to reach that one soul. I heard a story. I have no idea. It's probably not true, but it makes a good story and it makes a point. That a man and his son were on their way home one day, and they passed an accident, a car accident, where a car had passed on a hill, and there was a head-on collision. And as they were passing by, they witnessed 3 occupants in the car the car had caught on fire. And there were 3 occupants who were screaming in agony. And they got home, and the little boy was quiet, and he couldn't eat his supper. And he just went to bed. And in the middle of the night, he cried out. And his father rushed into his room, and he said, "Son, can't you sleep?" And he said, "Daddy, when men die, can we sleep?" I don't know if that's a true story or not. Probably a preacher story, I don't know. But it makes a good point. When men die, can we sleep? When people are dying and going into eternity without any hope, can we sleep? Will God hold us guiltless if we become self-satisfied and apathetic? if we sleep while men die, if we've so turned inward that we're oblivious to the cries that are happening around us in the world of people that are in pain and hurting? Are we blind and don't know it? Are we afraid? What is it that keeps us from talking to our neighbors and our friends about the Lord? Our soul's destiny may be at stake here. And so I challenge myself and I challenge you to pray about someone that you know that is lost, someone that you care about, and you pray about them. And I think if you'll pray just a little while, that will motivate you. You can't keep praying that without going. And if you'll pray about that and ask the Lord to give you the faith and the courage to talk to them about Jesus and about their future, that's where I want to leave this lesson tonight. There are a lot of really, really good things about this church that I'm really proud of and happy about. But there are some things that we can do better, and this is one of those areas, isn't it? That if everybody in this room would set your heart, set your mind on praying about somebody that you care about, that you know is not saved, and ask the Lord to give you the faith and the courage to go and talk to them, to find that opportunity, then I strongly believe that that opportunity will present itself. And we'll see some things happen in our lives. Another year has passed in our lives. And as I look back on my life, I don't have that many left. And another year is about to come up, and I don't know, none of us know if we'll make it to the end of that year, but this time next year will we be able to look back on our lives and see that there was something that we did that we couldn't have done without God's help. And so that's my challenge to you tonight. It's my challenge to myself and to you, that we renew our focus, we see how big our God is, that we accept what He has asked us to do, commanded us to do, and that we realize He will give us, He will provide for us what we need to do that while we stand and sing.